Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we bring back Chesa Boudin. He is the former DA from San Francisco, and he's now the founding executive director at Berkeley's Criminal Law and Justice Center. Welcome, Chesa.
Thanks, David. Good to be with you.
So, how are you seeing the world these days?
Oh, well, lots of things to be anxious about, and easy to get lost in doom scrolling headlines, but also always important to remember how much there is to celebrate and how lucky we are to be alive and enjoy all that California has to offer. So I try to remember to focus on the positive and not let myself get sucked into the negative, even though it's easy to do so.
So, from your perspective, I'm really curious. What lessons did you learn from your experience as DA in San Francisco?
Oh, so many lessons. How many hours have we got to record this podcast? But I guess, at a high level, I would say it matters less who we elect than how we build electoral power. And another way to say that is most of the people in politics that I got to know, and I think we see this on the national level, don't actually care all that much about any particular issue or cause or principle. They care about power. And therefore, if we're able to organize ourselves effectively, we can assert power on them around the issues that are important to us. And it matters less who they are and more, are we effective at organizing politically? Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some people who are going to be more resistant or be more in bed with your enemies, etc. But it does mean that ultimately, and we saw this, I think, very vividly in the criminal justice space with Black Lives Matter. In late 2020, every major corporation in America, every politician at the local level, at least in California and in other big states, people were bending over backwards to prove their criminal justice reform credentials. You had companies like the American Express and the NFL and Walmart and tweeting out black squares to show their solidarity and sending out branded literature, hiring DEI experts, right? And here we are just a few years later, and there's a national witch hunt led by the federal government against DEI. So the pendulum can swing, and a lot of savvy politicians will swing with it because they don't actually care. And so it's up to us to be involved in effective long-term organizing more than it is to worry about the details of every single electoral outcome.
And I remember being at a symposium at USF. It was maybe a month or two into your term, just before the world fell apart with COVID. And I remember John Pfaff getting up there and kind of warning everybody that, there's kind of this pendulum swing coming. And if we don't recalibrate how we evaluate ourselves, everything can turn. And he turned out to be kind of completely right about that. It seemed like almost the right had been sleeping on criminal justice reform up until that point, and they woke up and then they out organized progressives.
Yeah, I mean, John Pfaff's a smart guy. So we should definitely give credit where credit's due. It would have been hard for most people, and maybe again he's not most people, but I think it would have been hard for most people in July or August or October of 2020 to predict the extent, the speed with which the pendulum would swing and how far it would swing the other direction.
I agree.
I mean, I just think to be a reformer and in elected office, not an academic like him, but to be a reformer politician in late 2020 and to stand up and say, wait a second, this police accountability stuff is going too far, would have taken a unusual amount of foresight, or I don't know what you want to call it, but it was not the energy in the room. It was, I mean, look, the mayor of San Francisco, who was no ally of mine, was no friend of mine, scapegoated me every chance she got. She came out and said she wanted to defund the police. I was shocked. I was surprised. I never said that. She even got the chief of police in San Francisco to say defund the police. So imagine trying to be the reformer, the actual legitimate reformer, not the fake one, who comes in and says, wait a second, what are you guys talking about? I mean, it was just, everything was on its head. So yeah, it was an unusual moment. And I think hopefully we'll look back and see that the moment we're in right now is also an unusual one, maybe on the other extreme.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because right around that time, I remember going to a Black Lives Matter protest, and I saw a whole bunch of people that I would never have expected to see at such a protest. And I kept wondering in the back of my head, how long is this actually going to last? Because I mean, we kind of saw this in the 60s as well, right? Like there was a high tide, right after the March on Washington, and maybe you can extend it out to Selma and the Voting Rights Act. And then things kind of changed really quickly. And we kind of saw the same thing happen, maybe even faster this time.
Yeah, no question. There were a lot of people who were out there marching at Black Lives Matter rallies who were also happy to see me recalled. So what does that tell us? I don't know. Maybe COVID was a kind of a moment in our lives where on the back end of it, we were really looking for solidarity and socialization and companionship. Maybe we were looking for outlets for anxiety or angst. Maybe it's also just a reminder of how fickle we can all be in our preferences and our politics.
So we've seen now in the last few months, George Gascón, who was your predecessor in San Francisco, went down to LA, kind of rode the wave. And then he got overwhelmingly defeated in November. And then Pamela Price across the bay from where you were in San Francisco, down the street from where you are now, who got recalled just like you did, and they kind of followed the same playbook. Have we kind of seen the end of these reform prosecutors? Was that maybe not the vehicle for change?
Well, I guess it depends on what your scope is. I mean, if you're only looking at California, then you can paint that picture. But nationally, most reform prosecutors who've been elected are still in office. Some of them that were removed from office, like Monique Worrell in Florida, where Ron DeSantis just summarily removed her from office without any democratic process whatsoever. She won her seat back. So I don't think it's the end of the movement. I think, like any movement, it's evolving, it's changing. There are setbacks. Sometimes you have a lot of forward progress. Sometimes you have some setbacks. And certainly in California, it's been a rough couple of years for progressive prosecutors as a part of a broader criminal justice reform movement. But nationally, the movement's alive and well. You have many folks who've gotten reelected. Larry Krasner, Kim Foxx got reelected, finished her second term and decided to not seek a third one. And I could give you dozens of other examples, including in places where the far right wing spent big to try and oust them, using fear-mongering tactics, propping up opponents, engaging in smear campaigns. And we saw folks like José Garza in Austin, Texas, win re-election handily, even in the face of that kind of deep-pocketed opposition campaign. So no, I don't think the movement is over or dead by any means.
And there's something kind of weird about California anyway. I mean, if you look back to the last election, you saw the partial rollback of Prop 47 pass overwhelmingly. And then what I saw as kind of this bellwether for the the weirdness of California is Prop 6, which had no organized opposition. All it did was end slavery in prisons, and that got defeated.
Yeah, well, it didn't use the word slavery, which might have been part of the problem. It used the words involuntary servitude, which confused people. But yeah, there's no question that in many ways the pendulum has swung in California, and I think in some ways it's a reminder of the fact that the kind of national brand that Fox News has created for California as being this kind of crazy radical left, deep blue state has never been that accurate or honest. This is a state that elected, Pete Wilson, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ronald Reagan. I mean, you go back, Richard Nixon. You get a lot of, even in modern California history, a lot of Republicans have been elected statewide, and the reality is that the wealth here, the Silicon Valley wealth, the Central Valley wealth, are really quite conservative, and even the Democratic Party leadership that comes out of California is not AOC. It's not the squad as they were called. It's much more mainstream corporate Democrats, and so it's not entirely surprising to me that you see the pendulum swing in some moments, but it's particularly the case when voters have made clear for years that they're concerned about things like homelessness and fentanyl, and they see statewide leadership doing nothing about it. And they're busy getting rich on their investments. They're busy helping their friends in the real estate industry or the tech industry make billions, and they're not actually offering concrete alternatives. And so when conservative forces put a very misleading and in many ways dishonest proposition on the ballot in the form of Prop 36, it had the word homelessness in the ballot language, even though it doesn't say anything whatsoever about housing. A lot of people voted for the choice they were given. If Democratic leadership or frankly Republican leadership, if anybody had the wherewithal to put some kind of a more proactive alternative on the ballot that actually invested in housing or invested in drug treatment, I have a feeling that might have passed too. People were frustrated and looking for something to do because politicians were failing to do anything.
And I think that's a lesson that goes back, 40, 50 years in California. We saw the same thing happen with Prop 13, where people were getting priced out of their homes. They put Prop 13 on the ballot. It passed overwhelmingly. And it really crippled the ability of schools and local school districts to raise money. And the politicians dealt with the fact that people were getting priced out of their homes rather than crippling the ability of school districts. It might have made a bigger difference. One thing that was really interesting, I mean, you mentioned the homeless thing, and my DA, Jeff Reisig, was one of the leaders in the Prop 36 movement. And he was also, he put forward this plan to address homelessness, and he never once mentioned housing, which always seemed absurd to me. But homeless stems from the fact that in California, the cost of housing has gone so far up that anyone who has any kind of hiccup is going to end up out on the streets. And then if they have things like mental illness or substance use disorder, they're going to end up chronically homeless. And then it's really difficult to kind of turn that ship around.
Yeah, totally. And it's look, the reality is if you want people to be housed, you have to build houses of some kind. And that's something that for all kinds of reasons, politicians have made very difficult in this state. And there's also been a intentional and misleading conflation of being unhoused with being criminal. And the reality is being poor is not a crime, and not having a place to sleep at night is not a crime. even though the U.S. Supreme Court is making it easier for local governments to criminalize homelessness. So when people came to me and I was DA and said, well, what are you going to do about the homelessness? I said, I don't know. That's not something for the DA to address. In fact, at that time, the federal courts prohibited us from prosecuting people for setting up tents or sleeping on the streets, even if we wanted to, because San Francisco didn't have enough homeless shelter beds. So that's a area of law that has just changed in the last year under the U.S. Supreme Court. And not coincidentally, San Francisco as a city filed a brief asking the Supreme Court, the Trump Supreme Court, to overturn well-established precedent in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals to make it easier for them to criminalize people for being homeless. So there is a clear desire on the part of many, including democratic cities like San Francisco, to simply use the jails and the police to try and disappear homelessness. It cannot work. It is a approach that will significantly increase costs of the criminal justice system, will delay trials in murder and rape and homicide cases. It will bog down the system. It will make it hard for police to do the job that they're actually supposed to be doing of investigating crimes, because they'll spend their times instead managing homeless populations and tearing down tents. It is an approach that will clog our courts, our criminal courts, and it will not ultimately do anything to solve homelessness, because once people get out of jail, they still don't have a place to sleep. And you can make living in San Francisco as hellish as you want, which is something that our current DA said we should do to homeless people. But guess what? If Berkeley and Oakland and Hayward are all doing the same thing, doesn't give people anywhere to go. And many of the people who are unhoused in San Francisco, in fact, the majority of them were previously housed here and have community and have family and have jobs that they're trying to hold on to. So the idea that they're just going to go somewhere else is demonstrably false. It just does not work. It is not, cannot, and will not be a solution to the housing crisis.
Yeah, and there's an interesting tidbit, because I was just talking to my local police chief last week, and he mentioned, that a lot of folks that are being, kind of evicted from the Bay Area are coming here to Davis. And he said the problem is that they can't do anything to help those people, that it's the county of origin that is allowed to provide services to homeless people, not the county that they're currently residing. So by pushing people out, they're just creating this kind of push-pull thing.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. And San Francisco has for many years had a program called Homeward Bound, where people are in San Francisco from somewhere else and they want to go home. San Francisco will buy them a one-way bus ticket or a train ticket. And when I was a public defender, I had a few clients who wanted to go home and who weren't from here and who availed themselves of that. When their case was concluded, they got on a bus and they went to Chicago or wherever it was, Sacramento. But the reality, as I said, is that most people who are unhoused still have San Francisco as their home. This is where they're from. They're from the Bay Area. And so the idea that you're going to solve a problem with an estimated 8,000 unhoused people in San Francisco alone by buying them bus tickets to where? I mean, they don't have other places to go because this is where they're from. They've been priced out of their housing. They've been gentrified out of their neighborhoods. But many of them still have jobs, still have communities here and nowhere else. And that's just a reality that I think a lot of the folks in the real estate industry and in the kind of tough on crime crowd ignore. And it's just a long-term policy issue that has to get solved, and jails and prisons can't solve it. They just can't. There is no, even if you criminalize setting up a tent, even if you criminalize sleeping on a sidewalk, how long is somebody going to spend in jail for that crime? A week, a month, a year? And then what?
Yeah. So I could talk about this all day, but I did want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. So can you tell us kind of what your job entails at UC Berkeley Law?
Sure. So I'm the founding executive director of the Criminal Law and Justice Center. It's now been around 18 months, and it's basically a research and advocacy hub within the law school that engages in a wide array of work related to criminal justice. So I think of our work in three broad categories. One category, of course, we're a law school. We do education work. We teach classes to students. We supervise student research and writing. We get students involved in our other projects, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we think about our education role more broadly than just our students. We try to engage in elevating the nuance of the conversation about criminal justice in the public square through media engagement, through publications, through advocacy. And that gets me to a second category of our work, which is advocacy. That advocacy can be in the form of policy work, technical support, memorandums of understanding with local government to work on policy areas for them, or it can be in the form of litigation. For example, we file a wide array of amicus briefs in pending cases in courts across the country. And we also are litigating one of our own cases in California that we initiated with a partner outside of the university. And we expect and hope to do more litigation as time passes. A third area in which we are active is research, and that's of course in keeping with being in a university and supervising students, but we publish research on a wide array of criminal justice topics, often with an interdisciplinary lens. So not just the law, not just criminology, but often drawing on other areas such as journalism or sociology or computer science as well.
And talk about, I've seen some of your programming. You've had talks and symposiums. You've gone into the prison. You've addressed things like the Racial Justice Act. So it seems like you've kind of landed on your feet here and are helping to impact the discussion and the discourse.
I love the job. It's really flexible. I'm surrounded by really smart, thoughtful people, students who are passionate, creative, and are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. So it's a great place to be. We have a super wide range of projects that we're working on substantively. I mean, everything from AI and emerging technology in the administration of justice to Racial Justice Act to gate money, reentry issues for people coming home from prison. We do work around Brady and discovery on the front end of the system, jury selection. I could keep going. I mean, it's a really wide array of work we do in partnership with defense attorneys and prosecutors and law enforcement and technologists. And we get to do it through coalitions and partnerships, both within UC Berkeley and within the broader criminal justice landscape. So it's really a wonderful place. Berkeley is an amazing community, and I'm thrilled to have a team that includes lawyers and researchers and more who are engaging in super exciting cutting edge work that is absolutely going to have long-term implications for the administration of justice in California and beyond.
And what do you see as kind of the most promising or most exciting thing that you're working on currently?
Gosh, I mean, we have so many projects, and I'm so excited and passionate about all of them. It's really hard to pick just one. I guess because it's what I spent a lot of hours late last night working on, it's maybe top of mind. But we filed a class action lawsuit against the California Department of Corrections, and I'm pretty excited about the case and that sort of category of work, which we hope to do more of. Basically, the case involves a law that was originally enacted under then Governor Ronald Reagan, a law that is often referred to as gate money, where the Department of Corrections is required to give people $200 gate money when they leave the prison gate, when they're coming back to their communities. Back in the 70s, when the law was passed, the Department of Corrections lobbied against it. They wanted Reagan to veto it, and he refused. He understood, as did the state legislature, that putting people back on the street with nothing in their pocket actually set them up to fail and made our communities less safe. And so Reagan, who was no soft on crime dove, appreciated the need to give people money so that they could buy a hot meal or a shirt and tie for their first job interview, or have a place to sleep their first night out of prison. And Unfortunately, that $200 has not been updated for inflation. So it would have been about $1,500 in today's dollars, but it's still just 200. Even more unfortunate, and the kind of focal point of our lawsuit is that since 1994, the Department of Corrections, about 30 years now, has had an administrative regulation that authorizes deductions from that $200. So a lot of people getting out of prison don't get the full 200. They have some money deducted for clothing or transportation. That regulation, those deductions are clearly unlawful. They violate the statute. And so we filed a class action back in September, and we have a court hearing coming up in a couple of weeks. And we're looking forward to trying to get that money back for people from whom it was wrongfully withheld. You know, you talk about two systems of justice. How can it be that the government agency responsible for punishing people for violating the law is itself unwilling to follow the law? How can it be, if we're serious about public safety, that we let people out of prison, 30,000 people a year get out of prison in California, and we set them up to fail, to commit another crime out of desperation, when a law signed by Ronald Reagan, this is not a soft on crime progressive reform policy. This is a common sense, long-standing, well-established practice in California that was signed by one of the most tough on crime politicians in American history, because it's common sense that we need to have a way for people to eat without committing a crime the day they get released from prison. So we're excited to hold the Department of Corrections accountable to put money back in people's pockets from whom it's been wrongfully withheld, and to try to raise awareness about the need to take seriously this uniquely vulnerable transition from incarceration to community if we care about public safety.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I mean, another aspect to that, is the fact that if you're exonerated from prison, you don't even get that $200 gate money. So we're giving $200 to the people that committed the crime, but we're giving nothing to the people that may have been in for decades for a crime that they didn't commit. And that's on top of all the other regulations that don't make any sense anymore. We exclude people from housing and educational loans, and what the heck are we doing?
You know, if you were a conspiracy theorist, you'd say the so-called tough on crime people really like crime. I mean, they create policies and practices that ensure it keeps happening. You look at the way families are destroyed and separated. You look at all the really solid research about how incarcerating people for low-level misdemeanor offenses actually creates more crime. And you know, these folks just don't want to hear it. They're not interested in data. They're not interested in science. They're interested in talking tough. And it sure feels like they are trying to make sure there's more work for themselves in the future, rather than that they have safer communities.
Yeah, and I think of all the things that I've witnessed in the last 4 or 5 years, the fact that so many people ignore data, people that should know better, people that are educated, is really disconcerting, because there's just a lot of wrong impressions out there. And unfortunately, those wrong impressions, or outright lies even, help drive public policy.
No question. And I think it's accelerating with AI and social media and the proliferation of, surveillance cameras, because, you can tell somebody, hey, auto burglaries are down 90%. But if their, next door Twitter feed is full of video clips of auto burglaries, they're just not going to believe your data. They just won't. I mean, the visual images that they see, and by the way, those images could be from last week, and still crime could be down 90%. Because if you're seeing lots of images, whereas 5 or 10 years ago there weren't video cameras everywhere, so you wouldn't have seen the images, or maybe you weren't on social media, so you weren't seeing the images. Or those images could have been recycled from 10 years ago. Who knows, right? But when people see them, for whatever reason, wherever they're from, whatever jurisdiction or year, trying to persuade people with data is extremely difficult.
Certainly. So if somebody wants to find out more about the Berkeley Law program, how would they go about doing that?
Well, you can definitely check out our website. We are at law.berkeley.edu/research. criminal-law-justice-center. Or you could probably just Google UC Berkeley Law, Criminal Law and Justice Center and find it that way. We host events on a rolling basis that are open to the public. We always have upcoming events during the semester, great lunchtime talks, we provide food, and we also host conferences, symposia. Our research and op-eds are available on our website. And we also have an Instagram account where we post updates about our work and other news of interest. And we've got an annual report that we published about our first year, which is available on our website. You can learn about all of our programs on our website. You can always reach out to me as well. Happy to hear from you on social media or via email.
Great. Well, we've been talking with Chesa Boudin. He's the former DA in San Francisco, now heading up a very interesting program at UC Berkeley Law. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.